This tutorial will show you how to set up and stat with SoloStat. To start to stat a match in SoloStats, first you have to create your team. So let's go to our Teams page and press New. Our team will be called SU Spikers, and the league organization is NCSC. Now let's enter each player. So enter player name, number 2, Beth. Now on an iPad you can use these next previous buttons to move you forward, which is very helpful. Next is 5 and so forth. We'll enter all the names. Now one thing to remember is that the names will appear in your roster in the order you entered them. So think about who you want at the top of your list and so forth. We'll finish up here entering all the rest of the names. Now we'll pick our team level. This will be a 17-18s club team. It'll be female, and we'll press save. Okay. Now to create our first match, let's press on this match button, and we'll go down to the bottom of the page to new, and it will enter the opponent's name. Opponent will be the Bay Bombers, and the location will be the San Mateo Center. Now the venue name is very helpful if you're playing a tournament so that you can collect all the matches from a single location and compare that, say, to the next tournament. Press save. Alright, now we're ready to go. So now to stat our first game, we'll click on the game button here, and then we have to decide who's serving. So in this case, let's assume our opponent's serving, and we're going to receive in rotation 6. And the setter, we have only one setter because we're running a 5-1. It's Beth. Now here I have plugged in as lineup A. You can describe this any way you want to, be more descriptive than that, but it'll help to be able to aggregate all of one lineup versus another and be able to compare the performance of each lineup that you've chosen. Right? So for future reference, it's very helpful. We'll save this information. Okay? And now we're ready to stat. We'll click on the capture button to begin that process. Now before we start taking our stats, let's do a quick look at the screen and see what each of the button areas provide. So here you'll see the score. Our score is in blue, the opponent's score is in pink, and you notice the little dot indicates that they're serving right now. Now at any time if you need to make a correction, you can click on the score and make a change. So you can add, right, or take away some. Okay. And then you can also change who's got the serve. The next thing you'll notice is that we're starting in rotation 6. And again, if you ever have to make a correction to this, you can make an adjustment here. Okay. The blue keys are your players in your roster, as you can tell. And this particular pink button is to score certain actions to your opponent. At any time, of course, you can press undo to undo the actions that you put in here. On the top here you'll see that the setup is where we just came from. Rotation stat shows the stats for each by rotation. Player stats are here. The point log will show you the actions. We'll go back to that in a moment. And of course, save and close. So to stat, typically you'll do something like this. Let's just say that your player Beth, click on Beth, spiked the ball out. So this is under the errors column, and then you press enter. Another way to enter that information would be to press the player name, then the action, and then press it again, and that will also enter it. So a shortcut. Now the keys on the right here are in different groups. The gray keys are in rally stats, or in other words, these are actions that won't end the rally. So the first 3 are your passing ratings, a 1 pass, 2 pass, and a perfect pass, a 3, digs that your players make, and then hits that remain in play rather than ending up as a kill or an error. The green column here are the earned points by your team or your opponent. So there are aces. There are kills that come from your setter and kills that come from other balls. Tips, dumps, blocks, and down ball hits. And under errors, you'll have service errors and receive errors. You'll have spiking errors and tipping errors, digs, sets, down ball hitting errors, dump errors, blocking errors, okay? And then various other types of ball handling issues, for example, making an error on an easy free ball that comes over. And this is my favorite here, the who's ball button. This is when a couple of players stare at each other and let the ball go or run into each other or do something like that. The last column are the red buttons here, which are false, right? So these are actions by the referee to stop play. Okay, so for example, player goes up and nets, or maybe they go under the net, or maybe they have a foot fault on a serve. So that's the structure of the buttons. Now let's see how the system works a little bit. So I'm going to enter some other actions and you can watch what happens automatically. So let's say in this case we have our player Ellen and maybe she makes a digging error, and we'll use the double tap method there. So now you notice that the score just went up to 3. Now the next play we'll get the ball back, so let's just say that Ellen makes a kill from a setter set. Okay. And so the ball is now ours, the red dot's over here, the score went up to 1. And then the next thing that comes up is it's asking who's the first server on our side. So we'll make our first server be Beth. Okay. And she's our setter. She actually moved from rotation 6 now to rotation 1. Okay. So we're ready to serve. Now there are some shorthands that are available. So for example, since we know that Beth is serving, if she serves an ace, it automatically highlights Beth, and then all we have to do is just press ace again and the value is entered. In the same way, if she serves the ball out and she has a service error, once again we know it's Beth who's serving, and we press that again, and now the ball is in the opponent's court. It's 2-4. Okay. Now at any time if you make an error, you can also press undo and then change that. In this case it wasn't service error, so we're happy with that. We'll leave that alone. Also, if you need to change servers, you can do that as well. So let's back up again, and at this point you could press this button to change the server. In this case again, it's the correct server, so we'll leave that alone. Now at any time you don't really understand what these buttons are for, you can actually close this, let's save that, and then go to our help button. Okay, here you'll find very, very extensive help. And for example, you can look at the buttons and understand what each of the buttons are for, and so you get a very, very good idea about how to utilize each of these, and there's a clear description. For example, what's a down ball hit? It's an overhand hit made by a player while standing on the floor. That's versus a kill, right, which is assumed to be from a jump attack. So we score it as a down ball hit and kill separately. Okay. So this entire section has a lot of information about how to set up and also things like methodology. So let's go back into our game, and then let's look at how to score each of the actions. One of the key things you have to remember is that you're trying to keep track of actions on the part of your team. And so for example, let's assume the other player makes a kill. Now you could score it this way, but the problem with that is it's that you really don't care what they're doing per se as much as trying to learn about what you need to improve on your side of the court. So instead of assigning a kill to the opponent, it's really much better to undo that, and let's just say that the kill was in Ellen's area, so Ellen actually made a digging error, and that becomes much more helpful later on when you go back and review what happened during the game and to assess what needs to be improved. Now we track rotations very carefully in our system, so that will also come up as a factor as you go back into the various stats, and you can find out like what's happening by rotation and what errors are going on in what rotations. So you can see that very clearly here. At the same time, you can also look at player stats and see that Ellen will have made a digging error here. Okay, so there's 2 of them there. Right, so let's go back to our capture page. Again, that's the basic system. So for example, the only time I tend to use this button is for 2 things. One, if the opponent made a serving error, or if the opponent hit the ball out or made some other kinds of action error that didn't involve us. Okay. So that's a good way to think about it. Now the dialog comes back up asking for the next server, and this will keep popping up until all 6 servers have been identified, And at that point, it'll automatically go back to the first server. You can also, of course, go back and change that server. If you say put in a substitute or a serve specialist at any point, you can change that server manually here. Now, one of the questions you may be asking is, why so many buttons on the screen? And the reason is that by breaking the actions down to very, very specific skills, it makes it much easier to correct at practice. So for example, you may know that your team is doing pretty well by making kills, but they may be making a lot of down ball hitting errors. And these are really two different training activities, and so you can focus in on down ball hitting rather than just general spiking, if this happens to be one of your weaknesses. The other thing that's important is that all of these skills are tied to specific players and then in specific rotations, so that you can also then narrow down your practice and say, I want to work specifically on rotation 2 as my weak rotation, and then a specific set of skills in that rotation. So again, all of this helps to make your practice process a lot more efficient. When you finish statting the game, you can close the match and then press the backup data button. The power of all this stat taking takes place when you press the consolidated stats button. Here you can register yourself or tie to a existing Rotate 123 account. Once you've done that, when you press the consolidated stats button, it'll take you to web reports, which is the next video to watch.